So at this point, now that everything's off, you can assess things a lot better. You can just pull the hub right off. You'll see some old grease in there that needs to be cleaned out. You'll see my rotor got pretty well gouged up there. I don't know. Yeah, we'll see the pads when they come off, but that's pretty deep. And from here you'll be able to feel the back side. Sometimes you can access back there with your pinky. Damn spiders. Get out of here. But you can feel the back side a bit, and to me that feels perfectly fine. So it's mostly just the front pad that is the concern, but we'll do the whole shebang here. In order for the rotor to come off, the caliper has to come off. So you have to punch these slide pins out, and then the caliper will come off, and then these wheel bearing nuts have to come off as well, and then the wheel bearings front and back, and then there's a dust seal on the back side. So there's a lot to get to on these, but it's not that bad. Okay, to get these wheel bearing nuts off, they're on there super tight. Well, the outer one is anyway. The inner one should be about hand tight. There is a torque spec for it, but it's in the very low inch pounds. It's basically hand tight to take all the slop out, and then you put the sleeve on, and then the outer one you torque until you just about break something. Generally you use a socket like this, a 4-prong socket, and just have at it with the impact gun as much as it'll suffer. You can use a breaker bar. There is a torque spec, I think it's like 150 or 200 foot-pounds, something like that. But the tighter the better, especially if you use larger wheels. They tend to loosen up after a while for some reason. But before that, there's a little washer here. That guy. And then there's a little C-clip as well. And to get the C-clip out, generally you're better off with like needle nose pliers pushing the two edges of the C-clip. But we'll try to get that here. So here's the C-clip that goes on first. Sometimes these take a bit of effort to come out. I basically picked at this with a small screwdriver, but it fits in that little channel there to prevent this washer from sliding off. Now this is a splined washer to fit over the spline shaft, and the whole point of these two is if this super torque nut ever comes loose, it can only back off so far, which would only allow this nut to back off so far. So basically it's going to prevent your wheel from falling off, worst case scenario. It will be wobbling a shit ton, but it will prevent it from coming off completely, at least for a little while. Alright, so now it's time to get this super torque nut off. And to get that super torque nut off, this is a 4-ear socket. It's a Performance Tool part number W1269. It fits right over the top, just like that, and then has 1/2 inch to go on your impact gun. There's no right or wrong, just have at it. And that's it. Now, a couple important things, I believe. So this nut comes off, and then there's this spacer. They sit like that. And then this guy is basically just hand tight to take the slop out. This nut here is the one that holds the bearings against the rotor and keeps everything together, so it's very important. It only goes on the one way. You'll see there's a raised nub right there. Hopefully that's showing up on camera. That raised nub goes out, so it sits like that, and then there's this washer that goes on, and that nub fits in one of these holes, and then there's this keyway on this washer that fits in the keyway of that, and when both of these engage, it prevents this nut from turning at all. Sometimes you'll have to flip this over. You can see it's offset, so when you have this torqued properly, fit this on. If it doesn't fit the nub in one of these holes, you flip it over and see if it does then. And if you have to rotate this to get it to fit, tighten it. Always tighten, never loosen. Better to be just a pinch too tight than a pinch too loose. So these come off in a specific order, just like that, and then you set that aside. At this point the whole rotor is free. Now we got to remove the caliper. On a lot of newer vehicles, the caliper is held on with slide bolts that go into rubber bushings. This is an older design where it's just these exposed slide pins, one at the top and one at the bottom. So what you need to do is punch these out. Now I was using a very expensive, sophisticated tool, this old drill bit, spade bit, and you give them a good whack. Sometimes you kind of have to punch them in at an angle first, because they do have little ears on them. Sometimes you have to do one side first. There you go. You see that moved in. And then the other side. There you see now they're both moved in. And then now you can try and get both of them to move together. Sometimes this is easier with a screwdriver. And sometimes it's easier if you have the proper tool, like a nice oversized punch. How hard they come out depends on if they've ever been serviced. This guy I serviced maybe 2.5 years ago. You see all the lube is gone and dried. I used a really nice synthetic lube. But the pin looks pretty good. I believe these are either chrome lined or stainless, solid stainless. Not entirely sure, but if they're screwed up, they're not too expensive. I think they're like $3 to $5 a piece, maybe less, something like that. There we go. As you can see, this guy looks pretty well dried too. That's okay. That's why we're in here. So at this point, it might be wiser to take the caliper off first. Sometimes you can squeeze the piston in by hand. Nice pair of channel locks comes in real handy. But make sure you don't get the boot. Make sure you just get the piston itself. Widen up the channel locks if you have to. Okay, so the rear pad stays on the, the knuckle, and the front pad stays clipped to the caliper. This guy you just need a screwdriver to pop off. Make sure to never let the caliper, the full caliper weight, dangle on the hose. There we go. Okay. That should be good enough until I get some wire to hold it. Now, there's the problem. And you see even down here, some of the friction material started flaking off on me. That's tasty. But I was down to the rivets, and you can see it's worn unevenly too. It's kind of wedge shaped, thinner at this end than it is at this end. And that might be an an issue with the caliper sliding evenly on those pins. So this was just 2.5 years. I want to say it was just 2 winters. But after 2 winters with salt and everything, you see the slides got gummed up and weren't working properly anymore. So let's take a look at the rear pad here. Oh, very nice. Yeah, we did get down to the rivets on that one too. You see I lost a fair amount of friction material off the end there. Shim plate came off. That's kind of weird. Looks like it wallered out there. Interesting. So those guys are pretty toasty. Let's pull the rotor off. Let me turn you a bit here. Let's pull the rotor off and see what we got. It's very important to match these wheel bearings and make sure that the outside one stays with the outside race. Those don't look bad. They look like they might have got a little warm. There's an ever slight purple, but who knows. They actually look better than what I remember them the last time I was in here. There's no pitting, which is important. And if it says this, if it has the word Japan, don't replace it with a new one unless it's severely pitted, because the new aftermarket Chinese ones, even if you get a nice SKF or something, they're not as good as they used to be, like a lot of things. The trick to this is the back wheel bearing is held on by a grease seal. So what you want to do is you got to get that grease seal off. Put one of these nuts back on. Doesn't really matter which one. It's a very fine thread. Kind of hard to start. There we go. And this way you have a chance at reusing that seal. They're about $5 to $10, I believe. I've replaced them before, so I don't really want to replace them again. And then you just give this a good tug like a slide hammer. And it's hard to get back on. There we go. So surprisingly, the back side of the rotor doesn't have any appreciable ridges in it. Now it's important to note that this is for a 91 or 92 because it does not have the ABS tone ring on the inside. Now at this point you can take the nut off. And the bearing. This one looks pretty good as well. I don't see any pitting. Some slight discoloration, but it's not blue like it was under heat for a very long time. This one is also Japan, so I'm keeping it. Kind of screwed up the spring there on that guy.